I believe that we are starting in Leviticus chapter 16. And because we have a goodly number of chapters to start with, I'm going to move through some things quickly, obviously, but I do want to bring out a couple of portions of each chapter as much as I can. But we're going to spend the bulk of our time in chapter 19, Kedoshim, because to me that is such a powerful and amazing chapter, and there's some wonderful learnings in there for us, I think. So last time we were together was a couple of weeks ago, and we were looking at the issue of leprosy, zara'at. That was a fascinating discussion. I didn't think it would be, but it turned out great. I think we all learned some good stuff, and it was a very good conversation, and I appreciate you guys being there for that. This week, we're going to be looking at the heart of the Torah. I think, no matter how you look at it, there's a lot of rabbinic lore regarding how they break up the Torah portions, and in multiple ways. Leviticus is the center of the Torah, right? There's these portions that we're dealing with are the center, really, of the book of Leviticus, at least according to some tradition regarding verse counts. And Kedoshim is really important. And I want to just kind of remind you, keep in mind Acts chapter 15 as we are dealing with these portions, because this is Acts chapter 15, all of it. Very, very closely related to that. We'll spend a lot of our time in Kedoshim, as I mentioned. Lots and lots of holiness codes here. I want you to remember one thing as we study this stuff this evening, and that is that our Father in heaven decides and declares what is holy and what is not. Holiness is such a misunderstood term in religious circles. A lot of people have a lot of weird ideas regarding holiness, and you're going to experience that when you look into the fact that there is a tremendous amount of religious jargon that is used in Christianity and Catholicism, and it doesn't matter what religion you're talking about. Holiness, sanctification, righteousness, there's all of these terms are just loaded and come with so many preconceptions that we often fail to recognize that in the Hebrew language there are no holy words. They are very common. They are just commonplace words. Like, for example, and keep this in mind, especially during these portions, is the word holy simply means different, unique. It's very practical. And these instructions that we're looking at are all about how we must hear what he has said. This is what it looks like when you behave and believe differently. Notice that I said behave and believe, not believe and behave. We will do and we will hear, right? That's what we hear from the people in front of the mountain when he says, "Here are my commandments." We will do and we will hear. So these are the instructions for what does it mean to be unique and different. So the first thing I want to talk about is Leviticus chapter 16. And I'm going to share my screen with you for just a short portion here. I did press record. Thank you very much. Leviticus 16, starting in verse, I don't know what that is, 32. I forgot I cut off the verse. It says, "The priest who is anointed and ordained to act as high priest in place of his father is to make atonement. He is to put on the linen garments, the holy garments, and he is to purify the most holy place. He is to purify the meeting tent and the altar, and he is to make atonement for the priests and for all the people of the assembly. This is to be a perpetual statute for you to make atonement for the Israelites for all their sins once a year." So this chapter 16 is all about cleansing the tabernacle, the priesthood, and all of the people. Now, we have done some in-depth studies, and also Tracy has done a wonderful in-depth study regarding this ritual of Yom Kippur. And I think all of you have already probably gone down that rabbit hole. It's a wonderful experience to dig into the prophetic significance, especially in relation to Yeshua, regarding the rituals of Yom HaKippurim, which is described in this whole chapter of Leviticus 16. What I want to do for you just briefly is for you to place yourself on the opposite end of that spectrum. And I think it'll be instructive. When we look at all of the instructions, we're looking at it from a priestly perspective. We're looking at exactly who is doing it and how it's being done and when it's being done and all of the rituals surrounding that. And it's fascinating. But now I want you to flip it around and I want you to place yourself in the shoes of the common person. This is somebody out in the camp who is relying on this ritual for what? How does the common person view the ritual of Yom HaKippurim? Well, from their perspective, if any ritual can cleanse them of unintentional sins, it sure seems to be this one. Because you'll hear in Hebrew root circles a lot regarding the idea that there is no sacrifice that can be offered for deliberate and willful sin. Now that's different than high-handed rebellion. That's a different issue. But if it is true that the Torah deals with deliberate sin with the Yom Kippur sacrifice, then this is critical to everyone in the congregation. They are reliant upon one man, one time per year, to follow some very, very precise rituals, and to go into the holy place and offer very specific rituals. Now, if you've done any historical research into the period of the first century when Yeshua was around, and you can tell me if you've heard this before, they were burning through high priests like nobody's business. You know how you've heard the stories of a high priest going into the holy place and dropping dead, and they've got a rope tied around his leg to drag him out because no one can go in there. Okay, so what we understand from the historical research is that the people who were serving in the temple, a lot of them were bought and sold. They were political appointees, many of whom were not even the sons of Aaron. So we had a corrupted priesthood for sure. And it is, according to the historical record, that we had some real problems there with that priesthood, and they kept dying. Okay, they'd go into the Holy of Holies with a rope tied around their leg, and they die. And you drag them out. Now, to the common person who's probably gathered around and, they're relying on this one guy, one time of the year, to provide some type of an atonement, a covering for their sins. Now what happens when that dude goes into the Holy of Holies and gets smoked and drug out by his foot? Are my sins covered? Did that work? We also hear about these rituals where they would tie a ribbon around the horn of the goat, and it changes colors, and they put it on the door of the temple and it changes colors. And you hear all of these mythologies regarding some of the Yom Kippur rituals, and that it happened for a certain period of time after Yeshua died, 40 years before the destruction of the temple, that those rituals were no longer efficacious, if you want to use that word. They didn't work. The cords never changed colors. The westernmost light of the menorah kept going out. They couldn't keep it burning. The doors of the temple seemed to open of themselves. The lot, when they had to cast lots, according to tradition, it almost always came up in the right hand, but then it started to come up in the left hand, and that it was taken as some kind of a weird omen. So I just wanted you to take a moment to immerse yourself in the idea that you were a common Israelite and you were looking to this one person to provide this one ritual that's going to cover your sins for the year, and that it wasn't working very well. Lots of problems with this thing. Now I want you to recognize that Yeshua comes onto the scene. If you want to know, and I know that you do, and most of you already know this, but I'll bring it up anyway, this is the whole purpose of the book of Hebrews. For you to understand, guys, you don't need to freak out. If the temple was not already destroyed by the time the book of Hebrews was written, it's about to be. And the book of Hebrews was written for the express purpose of the Jews understanding you have a new high priest who offered one sacrifice, a perfect one. He was a perfect man, and he only needed to offer this one time. His priesthood is higher than the family of Levi. It predates the family of Levi, and his sacrificial atonement is perfect, and he will never need to repeat it. So when the temple is destroyed, as you're looking around you and you're seeing that these omens are not happening according to what you're expecting, do not be afraid. You don't need to worry about how this is working, because it's working exactly as our Father designed it to work. So that's all I wanted to say about Leviticus chapter 16, is that you just consider that from the other end of the spectrum. Fair enough? And you can go and look at some of our other teachings, look at Tracy's teaching if you want to dig in deep to Leviticus chapter 16, because it's fascinating. Now I'm going to move forward a little bit to Leviticus chapter 17 for just a moment, so that we can talk a little bit about that. What did I do? I did something I did not want to do. Let's see. Now we're going to share our screen and go to Leviticus chapter 17. Okay, so Leviticus chapter 17, I've just selected a little portion here. Starting in verse 1, it says, Yah spoke to Moshe and said, speak to Aaron and his sons and all the Israelites, and tell them, this is the word that Yah has commanded. Blood guilt will be accounted to any man from the house of Israel who slaughters an ox or a lamb or a goat inside the camp or outside the camp, but has not brought it to the entrance of the tent of meeting to present it as an offering to Yah before the tabernacle of Yah. He has shed blood, so that man will be cut off from the midst of his people. Now, I want to bring to your attention that the whole point here, and you will hear sometimes in the Hebrew Roots movement of people coming strikingly close to offering a sacrifice. I want to say that a layman, according to this portion, is not to offer any kind of a ritual sacrifice, period. Okay, that's my firm belief. And you can look here and in the book of Deuteronomy chapter 12, verse 15, if you want to make a note of that, that the same word is used for slaughter, shachat, but the context here is ritual slaughter, zavah, and it is not used in Deuteronomy 12, which is whereas Yah is telling you, hey, if you want to eat food, you can kill your animals anywhere you want and eat meat. That's not what we're discussing here. What we are discussing is you may not, and there's a passage in here that talks about you're no longer to sacrifice animals to goat demons and such, so we had some problems with people just doing it willy-nilly wherever they wanted to. And I know that there are some people in the Hebrew Roots movement who might slaughter a lamb for Passover. And I've known several people who do that. Now, here's the deal that I want you to be aware of. And I've mentioned this before. I just want to bring it to your attention. Look, if you want to slaughter a lamb in a humane way and kill the lamb so that you can eat it, who cares? A lamb has to die, right? You can't eat it alive. So you got to kill it. And it's preferable to do it in a kosher way because they do it humanely. And that's good. Here's where some people can cross the line. If you imbue that act of slaughter with some type of ritual, some type of religious fervor, some type of religious sentiment, I believe that you have crossed over dangerously close to a death penalty offense. Okay? So if you want to kill an animal for Passover. You want to kill an animal wherever you want. I don't care. Eat it. Enjoy it. It's great. But I have known of people in the Hebrew Roots movement who are like, they're doing like a ritualistic, religiously imbued sacrifice of a lamb. Some are even putting the lamb blood on their doorposts. And I am thinking, man, that's dangerous. Not touching that with a 10-foot pole. Because I understand the idea that I am a priest I am like a kingdom of priests, I'm one of these priests. But that's taking it too far. That's taking it too literally. That is arrogating to myself rights and privileges that I do not have. We've talked about that before. And so that's all I was going to say to you about Leviticus chapter 17. Fair enough? Now I'm moving through over to Leviticus chapter 18, and here's where we get to the fun stuff. It's all sexual sin. Now, Leviticus 18, I'm just going to read this section to you starting in verse 24. This is regarding sexual sin mostly. Do not defile yourselves with any of these things, these sexual immorality kind of things. For the nations that I am about to drive out before you have been defiled with all these things. This is why the land has become unclean, and I have brought the punishment for its iniquity upon it, so that the land has vomited out its inhabitants. You yourselves must obey my statutes and my regulations, and must not do any of these abominations, both the native citizen and the resident foreigner in your midst. For the people who were in the land before you have done all these abominations, and the land has become unclean. If you've ever wondered why the Canaanites needed to be exterminated, this is it. There comes a point with sexual immorality, and there's this chapter, and interestingly enough, another chapter over in 20 deals a lot with sexual immorality. Sexual immorality is a very powerful and virulent thing that wastes away at the individual's soul, and it also wastes away and destroys an entire culture. It really does. The more that we release ourselves to engage in various kinds of sexual immorality, it always tends to trickle down. And what I mean by that is when a society tolerates sexual immorality, inevitably it trickles down to the most vulnerable in the society, and that is children. Always. And there comes a point where a society has become so corrupted that it is merciful to destroy them. There comes a point when it is merciful to destroy them. Merciful both to them and to the people around them, because that's the important part. That is why the Bible has all of these death penalty cases. Because if you do not purge the evil from among you, which is what the Torah says repeatedly, you're infecting everyone else. It's not loving to let it slide. It's not merciful to let it slide. It is severely corrupting, and it spreads like gangrene throughout the whole system, throughout the whole body of a populace. And you can bring tremendous judgment on your entire nation. And we've seen it before. In fact, I'd like to just bring to your attention that there have been a couple of times when Father has felt the need to intervene in a very strong and visible way in human development. There's only 3 that I'm aware of. Now, you can count some others, but I'm talking about strong hand of Yah comes down and makes some drastic movements. I'm talking about at the flood. I'm talking about at Sodom and Gomorrah. I'm talking about at the Tower of Babel. Okay? What's fascinating is that if you look at the flood, there is a there's a common theme with all of these times, and Father is going to intervene again, right? This final one is a massive intervention. What does the number 4 often signify in Hebrew gematria, huh? Yeah. Well, that's a good way to think about it. The 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. So what does the number 4 often signify? Judgment. Yeah. Huh? Authority and judgment. So in the 4th intervention, if you want, it's really an intervention. That's a good way to look at it. This is Yah intervening to save the planet from a people who are fully corrupting. Now, he was more merciful at the Tower of Babel and decided not to kill everybody, but they were on a bad path and they needed to be separated. But look at the flood. It mentions the sons of God and the daughters of men. Now, I know that some of you have a different interpretation about that, but let's roll with that one for just a moment. It sounds like a sexual immorality issue, doesn't it? You look at Sodom and Gomorrah, there's definitely a sexual immorality issue there. Look at the book of Revelation, where it tells you why Father is coming to pronounce this judgment again. Sexual immorality is strongly referenced again. So what's fascinating too is that when you look at when you look at in the book of Genesis about the flood, does it tell you specifically why the flood came? It says all flesh had corrupted itself. Did you know that Hebrew word for corrupted is also shachat? Ritual slaughter. It's the same Hebrew word. It's the exact same letters in the exact same arrangement. Just fascinating little nugget I'd throw out there. I don't know exactly what to make of that. I can throw out some ideas, but I'd be speculating uselessly because I don't have any backup on that. But it's just fascinating to me that sexual immorality is such a powerful and corrupting force, and we must be very, very mindful of it. And I understand that is why a lot of young men are really, those who are very much guarding themselves are very keen to keep themselves pure of sexual immorality, especially in regards to pornography, because that is where it starts. It often starts with pornography. And in fact, if I were to talk to any man in this congregation in our culture, which has been hypersexualized going back to God knows when, I mean, it really exploded in the sexual revolution in the late 60s, but don't kid yourself, it existed before that. But it became commonplace. And I know that most men I talk to were exposed to pornography at a very early age, and it is a fully devastating thing. It really does mess with your brain. So guarding against sexual immorality is such a powerful thing that we need to watch out for. And again, I want to just point out, think Acts chapter 15. Things sacrificed to idols, blood. We have a section in here about blood, eating things with blood. That came in the previous chapter that we just discussed. Sexual immorality. This is the heart of our Father. And we're going to talk in Leviticus chapter 19 about some of the most important things. But just remember, this is all about holiness. God is wanting to be involved in every single part of your life, from what you eat, to who you have sex with and how you have sex and what you do for your days off. He's going to infiltrate every aspect of your life. The way you deal with the people around you, every aspect of your life he wants to infiltrate that. And he wants to take it over. And he wants to make you holy so that you'll be different, so that you'll look different than the people around you. That's the whole point, okay? That's all I have to say about sexual immorality. Now I'm going to get to the meat and potatoes of our discussion, which is Leviticus chapter 19, okay? So open up your Bible to Leviticus chapter 19. I'm going to read this entire chapter to you. It's not terribly long. But let's go ahead and discuss that. Leviticus chapter 19 says, Yah spoke to Moshe and said, speak to the whole congregation of the sons of Israel and tell them. Notice that phrase has come up twice now. Speak to the whole congregation of the sons of Israel. This is Father giving instructions, talk to everybody. Usually we just hear the Lord spoke to Moses and said, or tell Aaron, or tell the sons of Aaron. This is tell everybody. Speak to the whole congregation of the Israelites and tell them, you must be holy, different, unique, because I, Yahweh, your Elohim, am holy, unique, and different. Each of you must respect his mother and his father, and you must keep my Sabbaths. I am Yah, your Elohim. Do not turn to idols, and you must not make for yourselves Elohim of cast metal. I am Yah, your Elohim. Notice this phrase keeps being repeated. I am Yah, your Elohim. This is an authority statement. Verse 5, when you sacrifice a peace offering sacrifice to Yah, you must sacrifice it so that it is accepted for you. It must be eaten on the day of your sacrifice and on the following day, but what is left over until the third day must be burned up. Separate issue we won't discuss this evening. Fascinating insights. We could possibly talk about that afterwards. If, however, it is eaten on the third day, it is spoiled, it is corrupted, it will not be accepted. And the one who eats it will bear his punishment for iniquity, because he has profaned what is holy to Yah. That person will be cut off from his people. When you gather in the harvest of your land, you must not completely harvest the corners of your field. You must not gather up the gleanings of your harvest. You must not pick your vineyard bare. You must not gather up the fallen grapes of your vineyard. You must leave them for the poor and the resident foreigner. I am Yah, your Elohim. You must not steal. You must not tell lies, and you must not deal falsely with your fellow citizen. You must not swear falsely in my name, so that you do not profane the name of your Elohim. I am Yahuwah. You must not oppress your neighbor or commit robbery against your neighbor. You must not withhold the wages of the hired laborer overnight until morning. You must not curse a deaf person or put a stumbling block in front of a blind person. You must fear your Elohim. I am Yahuwah. You must not deal unjustly in judgment. You must neither show partiality to the poor nor honor the rich. You must judge your fellow citizen fairly. You must not go about as a slanderer among your people. You must not stand idly by when your neighbor's life is at stake. I am Yah. You must not hate your brother in your heart. You must surely reprove your brother so that you do not incur sin on account of him. You must not take vengeance or bear a grudge against any of your people, but you must love your neighbor as yourself. I am Yahweh. You must keep my statutes. You must not allow two different kinds of your animals to breed together. You must not sow your field with two different kinds of seed, and you must not wear a garment made of two different kinds of material. When a man goes to bed with a woman for intercourse, although she is a slave woman designated for another man, and she has not yet been ransomed, or freedom has not been granted to her, there will be an obligation to pay compensation. They must not be put to death because she was not free. He must bring his guilt offering to Yah at the entrance of the tent of meeting, a guilt offering ram, and the priest is to make atonement for him with the ram of the guilt offering before Yah for his sin that he has committed, and he will be forgiven the sin that he has committed. When you enter the land and plant any fruit tree, you must consider its fruit to be forbidden. 3 years it will be forbidden to you. It must not be eaten. In the 4th year, all its fruit will be holy. Praise offerings to Yah. Then in the 5th year, you may eat its fruit to add its produce to your harvest. I am Yah, your Elohim. You must not eat anything with the blood still in it. You must not practice either divination or soothsaying. You must not round off the corners of the hair of your head or ruin the corners of your beard. You must not slash your body for a dead person or incise a tattoo on yourself. I am Yah. Do not profane your daughter by making her a prostitute, so that the land does not practice prostitution, become full of lewdness. You must keep my Sabbaths and fear my sanctuary. I am Yah. Do not turn to the spirits of the dead, and do not seek familiar spirits to become unclean by them. I am Yah, your Elohim. You must stand up in the presence of the aged, honor the presence of an elder, and fear your Elohim. I am Yahweh. When a resident foreigner lives with you in your land, you must not oppress him. The resident foreigner who lives with you must be to you as a native citizen among you. You must love the foreigner as yourself, because you were foreigners in the land of Egypt. I am Yah, your Elohim. You must not do injustice in the regulation of measures, whether of length, weight, or volume. You must have honest balances, honest weights, and honest ephahs, and an honest hin. I am Yah, your Elohim, who brought you out of the land of Egypt. You must be sure to obey all my statutes and regulations. I am Yah. Fascinating collection of commands here. Now, I want to say, and I've heard people say this before, and I think it's a good idea, and you'll have to dig a little bit deeper to see if you find this to be true, that this is like Yah's explanation for what is a good explanation for the Ten Commandments. Absolutely. That this is like a fuller explication of the Ten Commandments. And I think that's probably true. It really feels like that to me. But I want to point out to you a couple of things. And the first thing is authority. In verse 3, I think I was reading, I don't remember the exact translation that I used, but it may have been the Net Bible, which generally speaking I think is a good Bible to read, but I was astonished by how terrible it was in this context. I saw several parts there where I was like, that is not what the Hebrew says. So I want to read it for you using just the standard NASB, which I think does a little bit better job. If you look at Leviticus 19, verse 3, I want to just read for you what it says in the NASB. And I strongly encourage you to look at a Hebrew interlinear or a Hebrew text if you know how to read a little bit of Hebrew. It says, every one of you shall reverence his mother and father, and you shall keep my Sabbaths. I am Yah, your Elohim. Got to wonder why those two things are connected. And number 4, verse 4, do not turn to idols or make yourselves molten gods. I am Yah, your Elohim. So what's fascinating to me about this particular portion is that this is really about authority. And you notice I said previously that authority is continuously reinforced in this passage. Both commands here are stuck together. Honor your father and mother, observe my Shabbat. These two are stuck together for some weird reason. I have an idea that I'll share with you, and you can determine whether you like it or not, but here's what I'm thinking. Both of these are regarding authority. Your recognition of authority. By acknowledging, we actually acknowledge Yah's authority in our lives in a lot of different ways by obeying his commands. But it seems like these two are very powerful. You notice that they're both part of the Ten Commandments, which are, some of the big ones. But here's the thing. Obeying parents that he has assigned to us. You don't get to choose your parents, right? So now, and I want to bring your attention to 1 Peter 2 and 18, if you want to make a note to yourself there. This is not about parents, but it's about slaves and masters. He says, I want you to obey your masters even if they're unreasonable. Now, are there truly wicked and nefarious parents out there? Yes, there are. I think it's not totally common. That depends on what your definition of evil is. There are we're all wicked in some way, but truly nefarious. I personally have seen and known a lot of people who are not religious and, pretty rough people, but they all love their kids. And they loved them as best they could. Now, there are a small fragment out there that would willingly inflict harm upon their children, whether it's by drug addiction or alcohol addiction or even sexual abuse. Or beat their kids or stuff. That happens, of course. But it's not nearly as common as, even though you are slightly wicked and you're selfish and whatnot, you still love your kids. Even the godless people love their kids and want to protect them, okay? That's by far the majority of people, I think. Here's the thing. By obeying our parents, even the unrighteous ones, we are testifying that we obey Yah. How can you honor, and I'll just ask you a question, how can you honor a father and mother who do not honor God? That can be challenging. One thing that you could do is not talk evil about them. Cover their shame. Cover their sin. In spite of the fact that they are not using you like they should. But as I mentioned, it's unlikely that your parents are going to, if you have kind of wicked parents, they don't want to force you to do evil. Some will. They don't want to prevent you from doing good, although some will. But when we recognize authority, it starts in the home. And this is such a convoluted thing, and it's such a powerful thing. I mean, we're instructed as parents not to exacerbate. I totally always mess this word up.
Agitate or exasperate your children.
Exasperate, I think, is the word that I'm looking for. You can create in your children a rebellious spirit. You can absolutely do that, and I see that a lot, which is so damaging, because a rebellious spirit in a child grows into a rebellious adult. And rebellion is like what?
Witchcraft.
It's like witchcraft. Rebellion, when you develop a rebellious spirit, it almost always starts in the home. And it almost always starts with parenting, but it doesn't have to. I have known some parents who, as far as I could tell, were very loving and very kind, and they did not exasperate their children. Their children just had a rebellious spirit. It just happens that you've got a kid that he's not interested in what you say. He's going to kick you to the curb no matter what. He just got a rebellious spirit. And unfortunately, to me, that says to me, Father, and this is what's so challenging about it, is that Father is telling me, this one needs some more education. You're not going to be able to give it to him. I'm going to have somebody else give it to him. And that can be very painful, because breaking a rebellious spirit is tough. And a rebellious spirit is a dangerous, dangerous thing to have. Remember what it means to, quote unquote, honor your father and mother. What does that mean when you're looking at the Hebrew text? What does it mean to honor your father and mother? How do you honor them?
Treat their words heavily.
You give great weight to their words. That's literally what it says in the Hebrew. Give great weight, kavod. Their words are heavy. I take what they say very seriously. Now, I don't even like to do that. One of my parents is sitting here right now. But you know what? I have had to deal with a rebellious spirit myself. I was a very rebellious young man, and I suffered greatly because of it. And I probably still am. But man, I'll tell you, a rebellious spirit is a very dangerous thing, and it is a hard thing to give great weight to your parents' words. It's very, very difficult. So that's part A of learning to be respectful of authority. Because, and I think this is why this is so important, if you don't learn to respect authority from your parents, it is that much more challenging to learn to respect the authority of God. It starts in the home. And unfortunately, it often starts with the father in the home. And so, if the father is not a righteous authority figure, you got a problem. That son or daughter is going to become rebellious. So we as fathers have to do our very, very best to be righteous judges in our home. You notice how much time was spent in this chapter talking about righteous judgment, not favoring the weak over the poor, or the poor and the weak over the rich and the powerful, having just balances. There's so much of treating people fairly, loving your neighbor as yourself, having righteous judgment. If you don't, you're going to exasperate your children. They're going to become rebellious. They're going to rebel against all different kinds of authority, and ultimately they're going to rebel against God himself. They have developed a rebellious spirit, and they've probably learned it from their father. Tough situation. Part number 2 to this equation is you shall keep, guard, protect my Sabbaths. This is the second part of how Father looks at whether you are submitting to authority or not. I know that observing Shabbat is, for some, loose and inconsistent, and for others, hardcore, even judgmentally so. So I think we need to have a little balance. I don't want people judging each other, but I also think we can't treat it with frivolity. And I don't mean festivity with frivolity. I mean situationally dependent, okay? I'm going to honor you, because you know that when you are observing the Shabbat, you are testifying to several things. I am under Yah's authority. He controls my time. Remember, time is the one thing that makes us all equal. We all have the same number of days in a week, number of hours in a day, number of minutes in an hour. We're all dealt an equal hand regarding our time. When I say, I'm taking this 24-hour period and I'm setting it aside for holy purposes, do not hear me say I'm holy in a jargon, religiously infused way. I mean different than all the other days of the week. That does not mean that I need to sit around and read my Bible all day. It does not mean that I need to sit around and pray all day. It means that this day must look different than the other days. It must be different. So what are you doing differently? Most assuredly, it has to do with work. We don't work on Shabbat. We don't make others work on Shabbat. We don't even make our animals work on Shabbat. That's the primary way that it should be different, because that's the one way that Father designated of how it would look different. It's primarily related to work. Now, the question is, what should it look like? That's not my problem. That's not my business. I have zero interest in telling you what you should do on Shabbat. What I will tell you is, don't do work. Don't have others do work. That's it. It's just that simple. Now you can go get yourself twisted around the axle regarding what is work. That's your business, okay? But I want to just say, Yah seems to take the Sabbath day most seriously. It is so often referenced, and great judgment comes about Sabbath day. Strange stuff. But there's the first part of my little discussion on chapter 19. Authority. Okay? Now I'm going to go into verse 4, which it's, and you know, I struggled for a minute with, how do I connect this? Do not turn to idols or make for yourselves molten gods. You know, these things are connected, because when we rebel against God or our parents, what are we really doing? We're seeking alternate authority. That's what idolatry is. We are rejecting the authority of our parents. If my parents tell me, hey, Alan, you should be doing this, and I have a rebellious spirit, what am I looking for out there in the world? Anyone who will tell me, no, it's okay to do that. I'm looking for an alternate voice that tells me, yeah, your desire is to do this instead of what your parents are telling you is totally fine, it's totally normal, it's totally natural, it's no problem, everybody's doing it. All you have to do is look at what happened with Eve and Satan in the garden. It's laid right out there for you in the very beginning. She rebelled against the authority of her father. She mischaracterized what he said. You've probably heard this 100,000 times if you have any kids. My parents won't even let me do this. That is not what I said. You're exaggerating the restriction that I put on you because you're looking for a sympathetic ear. Now, what that happens all the time is my parents say, don't do that. Anybody who comes along who has an alternate idea than my parents, and I have a rebellious spirit, I'm latching on to that. I want to hear somebody tell me what I want to hear. That's me getting my ears tickled, right? I have something in my heart that is at variance with my parents or my God. And anybody that I see who agrees with me, they become my friend. We're of a kindred spirit. You got a microphone?
Oh, I just had a quick.
Do you have a microphone?
No, I just wanted you to repeat what you were saying.
Yeah. Go ahead. Which part?
Oh, I just wanted you to repeat when you said when we rebel against our parents' authority, we're actually, what was it?
Seeking another authority.
We're seeking to substitute their authority with another. Yeah, and then, which is the heart of idolatry, because that seems to me like what idolatry is. It's like, I don't like the restrictions that my parents put on me, so I'm going to go somewhere else where somebody's putting different ones on me, or none. I don't like the restrictions that God places on me and my culture, my family, so I'm going to go somewhere else that gives me more free restrictions. My parents used to tell me all the time, hey, don't do this. And man, one of my friends would start talking, my parents said, we can't do that. And one of the friends would say, oh, well, my parents totally let me do that. You're done. Your goose is cooked, man. You just lost that battle because you got a rebellious spirit. You're looking for somebody to tell you what you want to hear. So alternate voices of authority is what idolatry is all about. So verse 3 and 4 are just so beautifully tied together regarding the authority of parents, the authority of Yah over your time and the Sabbath day, and rebellious spirit, idolatry. It all goes so wonderfully together. I want to jump ahead just a little bit to two primary things, and I'm going to try to wrap up here pretty quick because I know it's getting a little bit late for some of you on the eastern coast, or near the eastern coast, center of the country, whatever. Verse 14. Okay, I want to read for you verse 14, and I'm going to read for you in the NASB because that translation that I just read from in verse 14 was atrocious, terrible, and I apologize. It says in verse 14, you shall not curse a deaf man, nor place a stumbling block before the blind, but you shall revere your Elohim. I am Yah. Verse 14, I think about, do we have an issue with this literally? I mean, who would lead a blind person into a ditch? Or, put a stumbling block before a blind person, or curse a person who's deaf? That just seems so weird to me. When I was a kid, there were a couple of young men are brutal. And there was a pair of twins who had Down syndrome in my area where I grew up. And those kids could be brutal to those people. So I guess I shouldn't be totally surprised that somebody would put a stumbling block in front of somebody who's blind. But I think, should we spiritualize this to get some kind of a deeper meaning? Yeah, I think we certainly should. We can all agree that it's really bad to put a stumbling block before a blind person, but let's spiritualize this for a second. Because we know that someone can be spiritually blind or deaf, right? In fact, the scripture is full of it, especially in the New Testament. So this is not an unusual concept to think about being blind or deaf spiritually. Now, we can all agree upon that. But where it gets a little tricky is, what does it mean to put a stumbling block spiritually before someone who is blind? If we agree that a person who is blind spiritually is, what would you say if I asked you, well, what kind of spiritual blindness? What does that mean?
They're doing.
Well, that would be a person who is like spiritually blind completely to where they don't recognize the existence of God, and that would be like the deepest depths of spiritual blindness. But there's also other types of spiritual blindness, like the Pharisees, who were very religious and very clearly believed in God, but did not believe that Yeshua was the Messiah. They were also hypocrites, you can throw that in there. But there are people who are have various levels of blindness, various levels of deafness. Did you have a question, Gracie? Give her a microphone. Yes, please. Somebody hand Gracie a microphone so I can have her tell me something.
The first thing that comes to my mind is our family back in Maine. And
Your personal family.
Back then, we did homeschool and everything. We have kids in the Word. We come over here, and the Lord has opened our eyes to this, and they just don't get it.
That's a great observation, Gracie, and that is related deeply to what I want to talk about here. We could describe, and we often do, people who do not believe what we would consider the full depth of the truth, right? We have a corner on the truth. And of those who do not see things like we do are spiritually blind. Can we agree upon that? Of course, we can all agree that people who are unsaved are completely spiritually blind and deaf and dumb and however other metaphors you want to put in there. But now, if we agree upon that, what would it mean for us to put a stumbling block in front of a spiritually blind person?
Like your reference to the kids, do what you want, the law's done away with, things we know are not true.
Okay,
Letting
but
them hang themselves with some behavior. Like
Oh,
the
okay.
Sabbath isn't, worship
So you-
on any day you want to worship.
okay, so let's just use that as an example. Brett brought up a standard Bible church Christian Sunday worshiper, whatever, who does not agree with you on the Sabbath day. We would say this person is somewhat spiritually blind. They just can't see the full truth in this regard. But what does it mean to put a stumbling block in front of them? How would you put a stumbling block in front of that person?
Would you cut off?
Hmm?
Would you cut off communication? Stop.
Cut off communication? Would you think that would be a stumbling block?
Well, where are they going to get that truth? Where are they going to get that information if you aren't the one that maybe could? And then you're torn with throwing pearls to swine, or whatever. but it's somewhere in between there. I'm guessing.
Yeah, no, Lonnie has brought up a really good point, and hand that over to Tracy. That is a really good point. I mean, you have to have tremendous wisdom here, because I'm gonna before I go to Tracy, I'm gonna ask you to write down a couple of passages, okay? I want you to look at Isaiah 6 and 10. I want you to look at Matthew 13 and 19. I want you to look at Romans 1 and 21. And I want you to look at Hebrews 3 and 13. I'm going to repeat those one more time. Isaiah 6:10.
Isaiah 6:10.
Yep. Matthew 13:19.
Matthew 13:19.
Romans 1:21.
Romans 1:21.
And Hebrews 3:13.
Hebrews 3:13.
Look at those passages in regards to a stumbling block. Now we're going to delve into this for just a moment, and I'm going to defer to Tracy for just a moment to get her thoughts on this.
I was just going to point out Romans 14, that Paul's talking
Did you
about.
say Romans 14?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, he was, that's the chapter about
The love.
vegetarian.
Oh, vegetarian. Yeah. Stumbling blocks of idols and.
Yeah, and so here in verse 15, it says, in righteousness you shall judge your neighbor. And then, backing up to not reviling the deaf or putting a stumbling block before the blind. He talks about in Romans 14 not putting a stumbling block before your brother. He says, who are you to judge your brother?
Right.
So there's this
And that was in relation to someone who says, I'm only going to eat vegetables and I eat meat, or I'll never eat meat again. Okay.
So I'm just seeing a connection potentially of judging someone and putting a stumbling block
Yeah.
before them, because
Yeah.
I don't know if you're condemning them in that sense, and that's going to cause them to perhaps stumble.
Yeah. I'm
But
glad.
it's not righteous judgment.
Right. I'm glad you brought that up, because judging someone, to me, we have two different issues here. We have a stumbling block and cursing. To me, those are two different things. If I am casting judgment, making a judgment call regarding someone who doesn't do things the way I do, I think that's a curse. You're cursing a deaf person. Whereas a stumbling block, placing a stumbling block for them, is a little bit different. That's just my idea regarding the interpretation of this passage, totally open to interpretation. But it's fascinating to consider that dichotomy. Angela, hold on a second. I'm going to Jerry for a sec, and then I'm coming back to you. Thank you, Tracy.
I think a stumbling block, let's say I told you that I agree with everything you're saying. Really sounds good. Then I said, I think I've got something better. I believe in universalism. All roads lead to God.
Yeah.
Pick which one, it doesn't matter which one you believe. If you believe each one to the best of your ability, you're going to heaven.
Right.
I believe that's called universalism.
Yeah.
To
100%.
me, that would be quite a stumble. I've heard Oprah say that and a few others on TV.
Yeah, 100%. You can pass that along, Jerry or Angela. You want to grab that for me? Thank you, Karen. Angela?
You and I talked a lot about this one this week, and I think I have an idea that maybe the way, when we first encountered this movement, the way I presented it to a family member was putting a stumbling block before the blind. And it was truth, yes, but it was the way it was presented that caused them to reject it and then build up an even harder shell to accepting it. And I think that goes along with the verses later in the same chapter about the tree, and that you don't share that fruit for the first 3 years, the 4th year is to God, and then the 5th year it's shareable. And I think that when we find this movement and we go out there all self-righteous and zealous and start telling other people how they're doing it wrong and we're doing it right, we are a tree that's in that first 3 years. We should have kept our mouths shut during that period. And instead we're out there throwing our fruit at people and putting stumbling blocks in front of people who are blind. And I think that we have to use wisdom about the way we approach people. And I know that me personally, I did not.
Most of us did that. I think all of us, there's a lot of head nodding in here.
We curse the deaf, well, they're going to hell, that kind of thing. We curse them.
I think that's a fine way to look at it, because you can clearly see that we have placed a lot of stumbling blocks before people by the way we have portrayed what we believe. And if you're talking with your standard Christian brother or sister and you know they're going to fight you on this thing, is it the right thing to do to bring it up? Man, that's such a challenging situation, because so many people are going to say, and I hear you, who's going to tell them the truth? Okay, here's where you have kol vomer, weighing which commandment to keep. You're going to violate one or the other. I am commanded to share truth with people, but what if that truth is going to do them more harm than good? What if, and this, you notice that this goes right back to what we were talking about a second ago, rebelling against authority. If I say to someone, hey, did you know that you're violating the Sabbath? And here's why. That ground has not been prepared. The stones have not been removed. They have never asked me, hey, what are you doing? They're not curious. It's me hitting them over the head with it. Now, what happens when I have just told them the truth and they flat out reject it? They have entered into the realm of rebellion. They now know the truth. They don't believe it's the truth, but the truth has been presented to them, and they have rejected it. That's rebellion. They just aren't aware of the rebellious. I mean, who is a rebellious spirit? Are they full? Yes, I am fully in rebellion. Nobody does that. They just know what they know, and they're going to do what they want. But to the people around them going, you're in rebellion. Okay, so is it loving and kind to say to your brothers and sisters in Christ, for whom Christ died, they love Yeshua, they just don't know him, they just don't know what exactly they want, what he wants from them. They're a little bit fuzzy on what their responsibilities are. I want you to consider it that way. Not that they're not saved, they're a little fuzzy on what their responsibilities are. And if they're curious to learn what their responsibilities are, then by golly, you bust out your can and you say, let me tell you, because I've been studying my Bible. but hopefully you've demonstrated your knowledge and your wisdom so that they will ask you. You seem like you read a lot about the Bible. You talk about it a lot. Some of the things you say really let me know that you've been reading this thing. I'm curious to know. That's a person who's ready to hear. But you just busting out your can of Sabbath on somebody is not loving. I'm going to throw a couple things out here, hand that to Mike. Sticking the truth in someone's face who cannot hear it is not loving. Here's a couple of things. Here's some stuff for you that's going to make some of you stumble. I'm going to put a stumbling block in front of you. You ready? How about talking in Hebrew all the time? Think that's a stumbling block? You bet it is. How about using the holy name all the time, making the people around you feel like, who's this dude? Well, I understand.
That I disagree.
I know you disagree with that, and I love you for it. But, we can disagree. But I'm saying, hey, we got to be careful because that can be a stumbling block. How about holy days? How about eating things that are unclean? Okay, we're gonna. What does it say when you're going out to lunch with your Christian friends and you're like, what are you eating? Is that pork? Okay, yeah, that's a stumbling block. You are not being wise in how you're doing things. Oh, I can't go out with you today. It's the Sabbath day. Now, is that the truth? Yes, it is. Do you need to offend them? No, you don't. Now, some of you are going to disagree with me, and I may lose some friends. Huh?
What do you say then?
What do you say? Great question. Someone says to me, hey, come with us on Shabbat. We're doing this. Hey, that sounds like a lot of fun.
I don't say Shabbat. I don't say Shabbat.
No, sorry. Hey, come with us. We're doing this. What do I say? I'm so sorry. I can't. I have a prior engagement. And I do. Now, somebody who's got a very strong sense of justice is going to say, you're not telling the truth. No, I am telling the truth. I'm being wise about telling the truth. I'm as wise as a serpent and as gentle as a dove. I do not need to tell them why I can't go out with them unless the situation calls for it. And it is done in love. That's a stumbling block in front of the blind. Mike.
I was just going to say, I think this is what Paul refers to, like in Corinthians, when he's talking about gaining people for Christ. When I'm speaking to a Jew, I'll speak to a Jew. When I'm speaking to the Gentile, I'll speak to the Gentile. Right? He has that kind of wisdom to meet people where they're at.
Right.
So he's not alienating them.
Right. 100%. And I just need to remind you, and I'm going to get off of this topic, that Yeshua did this very thing. This is not coming from me. This is coming from Yeshua. When he talked to those who could hear him, he told them straight up truth. When he was around people who he knew would not hear them, he started to speak in parables. He did not want them to understand. He wanted them to be in the dark because it was the merciful thing to do. I know that sounds really abhorrent to you, and it sounds wrong, but I ask you to look at it and look at those passages. Look at those passages that I shared with you, and especially in Isaiah 6 where it's talking about why. Yah is the one who closes a person's ears and heart. And you can see in these passages that I shared with you, especially Isaiah 6, why does he harden their hearts and give them ears that can't hear and eyes that can't see and a heart that can't understand? Because that has been their practice. When Yah says to you, here, learn from me with a small thing, and you smack his hand away, he says, let's try that again. Here is a small thing. Let me help you with this. And you smack his hand away, you're not going to be able to see that hand anymore. He takes away your ability to see that hand. It's a form of judgment. He's the one who makes people blind, and it happens because you reject his truth. When you reject his truth, he takes away your ability to see. He does that to you. It's basically, I don't even know that you want to say he does it to you. It's what happened. It's what happens when you're rebellious. You lose your ability to see and hear. Is someone here? Okay. Did you want to say something, or was it Tracy?
I was just gonna say, it's interesting, there's passages where Yahweh says, and I will put a stumbling block before them. So there's instances where he does do that, so.
Right.
I think that's interesting too.
Right.
And as far as like, I think tying into like what Mike was sharing about, to the Jew I became as a Jew and whatnot. Like I used to post a lot on Facebook back in the day, and I would just use the New King James and stuff because the people I'm trying to reach don't know those words yet. But I would use the opportunity to educate them. So I'd say this word means this.
Yeah.
And then people get to know me and get to know us and our lifestyle, that they see that we do those things. But I think it's like, there's a, you want to set that precedent. You don't want to, like, I don't like saying Jesus. That's not for me, but I'm going to say that to somebody who doesn't know his Hebrew name. I'm going to say Jesus.
Right.
His Hebrew name is Yehoshua. So that's usually the word I use. I hope you don't mind, or
Yeah.
something like that.
Right.
Just kind of being gentle, I guess, with your.
Yeah. 100%. You're 100% right. You start, saying Yeshua. I've had it happen to me. It's like, no, his name's Jesus. It's like, well, okay, that's fine. I'm totally fine in your culture, and I'm from your culture, so listen to me. Yeah. Listen to me being cool. The collective we. Yes, his name is Jesus. That's fine. It's just fascinating if you start talking to him about his real name. But man, how you do that is really critical. It's really critical how you do that.
Where's Joshua?
Right.
Call him Joshua.
Right.
Because that's what.
That's more accurate.
Absolutely. It's more accurate. It has meaning. It actually has some meaning, whereas Jesus doesn't really mean anything in any language. It's just a weird transliteration. Right.
It's interesting. I don't know if anybody else has noticed, like, more and more Christians are being more accepting of the name.
I agree. I agree with
It's just
that.
like, oh yeah, I get it.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that.
That's what
Osmundo, what? Yes, please. Grab the microphone. Osmundo, what's up, brother? Say something.
Hey, so what you were just saying, it actually reminds me of a scripture in a passage in Proverbs. It says, those who turn their ear from hearing Torah, even their prayers are an abomination unto the Almighty.
Mm-hmm.
And, this discussion is actually kind of bringing some light, I'm sure, to everybody, but I'm just kind of thinking, like, when it comes to evangelizing, our walk is what you're presenting is very sensitive, because it's like our walk is preventing us from evangelizing, because when we're presenting truth and they turn away their ear from hearing the truth, now that's a stumbling block for them.
Mm-hmm.
So where does that fall in line with us spreading the gospel?
That's a great question. That's a great question. And I think that you have to recognize, not just you, but we have to recognize that spreading the gospel spreading the gospel is for the unbeliever. Spreading the Hebrew roots is different. Okay, so if you're going around to people who don't know God in any way, shape, or form, and you are preaching the gospel to them, there is a God, and He has a Son, and He died to save you from your sin. And by the way, there is such a thing as sin, and it's written in the Bible, and yeah, you're a violator, so you need a Savior. Yeah, that's the gospel presentation. That's different than you talking to a religious person and saying, you got it wrong. You see what I'm saying? That's that's apples and oranges. So
well, actually, but they do tie in, for instance, the gospel, what I read in, I think it's in, First Peter, I gotta look at my scripture, but it says that the gospel is that the word of Jehovah is forever. What is the word of Jehovah? Is Torah and the prophets, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then when you say what is sin? Sin is the violation of Torah,
mm-hmm.
which is what we're observing. So it all kind of ties in, it kind of just circles back to obeying Torah, because they say, what is sin? Where there's no law, there is no sin. It's all sin. And
I totally agree with that. And every one of us Christians needs to become more obedient to whatever way we can. But what we have decided is that these commandments of Torah are more important than those. We're placing all of our emphasis on holidays and food, whereas Christians might place their emphasis on a different set of commands. We're all just trying to elevate the commands that we believe in over somebody else. Now, I personally think that the holy days, Sabbath and all the other ones, are important. I also think that eating unclean things is pretty bad. So my beliefs are a little different than theirs. But I'm basically telling them these things are super important, and they are super important. But to them, they may not be quite as super important. So did you want to, go ahead, Angela, you get the final word on this. Yeah, go ahead.
You guys were talking, when I was back there comforting my cat, y'all were talking about saying Jesus or Yeshua, right? The different ways to say it. I heard a quote. I thought this was so good. He said, you don't pronounce his name with your lips. You pronounce his name with your life.
Digging it. I'm digging it. I think it's from Grant, probably. Mike?
Are you closing?
I'm closing.
I just wanted to throw one other thing out there about the verse 3 and 4 is kind of the earthly representation, and there's a bookend here in chapter 19 on verse 30 and 31.
Kind of like a menorah pattern?
Yeah, it said, keep my Sabbath and revere my sanctuary, right? And he's the Heavenly Father in that sanctuary rather than the mother and father at the beginning, right? And then it goes into you should not turn to mediums and seek spiritual knowledge, which is again usurping this authority from the Father. Wonderful insight.
And that we're defiled to be unclean by them, which is spirit knowers and whatnot. And this is what I think we're seeing in the New Testament, the unclean spirits being allowed into the people because of these types of rebellious things.
Yep, 100%. I'm going to throw out one final thing, and I apologize so much for being late. You guys can stay late and party all night long. I don't care. I got one more thing to tell you, and I think it's super critical, and I think that everyone needs to hear it and hear it very carefully because this is super awesome and very, very critical. Chapter 19, verse 16, 17, and 18. Very, very critical. I'm going to read it for you really quickly. It says in 16, 17, and 18, you shall not go about as a slanderer among your people, and you are not to act against the life of your neighbor. I am Yah. You shall not hate your fellow countrymen in your heart. You may surely reprove your neighbor, but shall not lift up sin, is what it says in the Hebrew, because of him. You shall not take vengeance nor bear any grudge against the sons of your people, but you shall love your neighbor as yourself. There is the heart of the Torah right there. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. And here is a big part of it, okay? So I'm just going to run through this really quickly. Listen to it again later on the recording or something, because this is critical stuff. It says that we are not to literally, you've probably heard this before in verse 16, stand in the blood of your neighbor. Whereas in the English, NASB, it says you do not act against the life of your neighbor. It literally says stand in his blood. Now that is because you shall not go about as a slanderer and then stand in the life of his blood. Stand in his blood. That's literally what the Hebrew says. So what that is telling you is that slanderous speech, evil speech about your brothers and sisters is like standing in their blood. Now you can read the rabbinic commentaries about what that means, but lashon hara, evil speech, is like killing your neighbor, their reputation, killing their reputation, okay? Making them assassinate their character, making them blush. When you say something and you embarrass them, the blood rushes to their face. The rabbis have interpreted this in very unusual and interesting ways. But what it is literally telling us is that we are not to use evil speech against our neighbor because it's like standing in their blood. They consider this a type of murder. Now, you're killing your neighbor's reputation, shaming them rightly or wrongly, whether they did it or they didn't. This is important. Now, yes, verse 17 instructs us about not hating our neighbor in our hearts. It says, you shall not hate your fellow countrymen, but you shall surely reprove him This is dealing with those things in our relationships where somebody gets under your skin. Somebody says something that offends you. This if they lied, they stole from you, they abused you in some way, we have punishments for that, right? You have to pay back what you stole. Or whipped with 30 lashes, whatever. There's a punishment for violating your neighbor in that way. This is talking about the subtle stuff. Because what's going to happen always, and this is where evil speech starts, personal insult or offense is given or perceived. It's not always real. How many times have you had that happen to you? Where you got offended in some way because of something that somebody said or did. And you, instead of using wisdom and going to the person and saying, you said this, or you did that. Did you mean to do that? Because I was kind of hurt by that. They might very likely say, no, good Lord, no, I didn't mean that at all. I'm so sorry. You've just taken care of that problem. It's done. But what this is specifically talking about is you not, because of your aversion to conflict, your fear, whatever it is, if someone offends you in some way, shape, or form, and you do not have the ability in some way or another to go and talk to them about it, but instead what you do is talk to somebody else about it, which is what we always do, you are standing in their blood. And you are basically, in the Hebrew, it says, in the verse 17, it says, you shall not incur sin because of him. That literally says in the Hebrew, you shall not lift up, nasa, sin because of him. What you're basically doing is your neighbor sins against you, maybe, if you interpreted it correctly. You take that sin that you perceive and you hold it up for everybody to see. And you go and you talk to your neighbors and your friends about it. Can you believe what Karen did? You go home and you talk to your wife. Angela, I cannot believe what Karen did tonight. I'm holding up Karen's sin. I might even talk to a few other people about it. Instead of just dealing with the situation and going to talk to Karen. Karen, I'm assuming you did not mean that. Karen's going to say, in a lot of cases, no, I did not mean that. Knowing Karen, she probably would say, yes, I did mean that. No, I'm kidding. But you have to, if you cannot, and a lot of us, so many people are afraid of confrontation. They're so conflict averse that they'd rather go and talk some trash and destroy that person's character than just talk to them. Say, hey, you offended me. Or did you mean to offend me? I'm sure you didn't, but I wanted to tell you that I was hurt. Okay? And you know what's interesting? It's interesting to me that the Bible is telling us how to deal with it when we get butthurt. It doesn't tell the person who's doing it. There's very few scriptures. There are some, but there's more about us dealing with offense than giving offense. Because it's so common, unfortunately, that oftentimes we feel offended and we really shouldn't be. I think that's more common than it should be. But when you are bearing a grudge, all of this is connected. Bearing a grudge, talking trash about your neighbor. Look, I want us in this fellowship to get along and to love one another. And if someone offends you, please do not talk about it with someone else. Go to that person. Do not be afraid. The relationship can handle it. Karen? Wait. Give her a mic. Thank you, Mike. Yeah, Karen, go for it.
But when you're talking neighbor, does that literally mean your neighbor?
Anybody and everybody.
Anybody and everybody.
Anybody and everybody.
Because I have a horrible problem with my
Literal neighbor.
literal child abuser,
Oh, yeah.
tier 3
Sure.
sexual.
Sure. I understand.
But that's my neighbor, and
Yeah.
And,
Well, you know what? Somebody asked Yeshua that very same thing. Who's my neighbor? Yeah, it could be the guy who lives next to you who is a level 3 sexual predator.
how do I love him in my heart?
No one's asking you to love him.
Love us with all of our sin.
Well, hold on a second. But we're not talking about loving your neighbor at this point. I mean, yes, you can, extrapolate here and say, well, you got to love your neighbor as yourself. Understood. But what I would say is, specifically, is there any good that is going to come from you saying to anyone, my neighbor is this level 3 sex offender? Maybe. Okay? And this is one of those really challenging things where you have to determine, is it important for these people around me to know that my dog bites? Yeah, it is. You have to use wisdom. Now, do you need to go to your neighbor across the street who's 55 years old, is a single man, has no children? Does he need to know that the guy living next to you is a level 3 sex offender? No, not at all. If a new young family moves in across the street on the other side, and they have some young kids who are running around the neighborhood, do you think it might be wise to let them know that we have a dog in the area that bites? You must use great wisdom when using your mouth. So that's the only answer that I could really give you is, if you're going to use evil speech, use it very carefully. And you might say, gosh, is that really evil speech? It is. For all you know, and I don't know this to be at all the case, could it be possible that a man offended a child, went to prison, found God in prison, repented and changed, but now he's labeled by society? Is it righteous? Yes, it is. Does he have to live with that with the rest of his life? Yes, he does. Does he need you going around and telling everybody what he did? No, he does not. But you have to be careful, because some people might. Some people might need to know that. If I have children living next to a sexual predator, I want to know that. I want to know that a dog bites. Because it's not fair to pretend like that dog don't bite. If it's going to hurt somebody, then I am not loving my neighbor. Tough call. Good point that you brought up. Challenging one. Because there is a time to speak up. Often there is not, though. Great question. I'm going to terminate our discussion there. I apologize for keeping you late. I hope that you'll, go deeper into some of this stuff, because there's more. I didn't have time to go through all of it, but it's so powerful and so deep and so relevant to each of us that I hope that you'll pray about it and think about it and dig deeper into some of this stuff. It's really critical to our fellowship, to our relationships in general. Very powerful stuff. Fair enough? Let us pray.